I rewrote the script as an original narrative based on your provided source. In the first half of the 20th century, while Europe was moving toward the flames of another world war, another vast struggle was already tearing Asia apart. It was a war of cities burned, armies exhausted, governments uprooted, and civilians trapped between empires and ideologies. It was the Second Sino-Japanese War, a conflict that began as a clash between China and Japan, but soon became one of the decisive fronts of the Second World War. To understand why this war became so brutal, we must go back to a wounded China in the 19th century, when the old Qing dynasty struggled under foreign pressure, internal rebellion, corruption, and humiliation. Western powers forced open Chinese ports, seized influence, demanded concessions, and exposed the weakness of an empire that once considered itself the center of civilization. By 1911, anger had grown too strong to contain. Revolution overthrew the Qing dynasty, and the Republic of China was born. But the new republic did not immediately bring unity. Instead, China fractured. Warlords carved the land into private kingdoms. Some ruled cities, others ruled provinces, and many commanded armies more loyal to silver, survival, or ambition than to any national flag. Out of this chaos rose the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party, determined to reunify the country. Its most powerful leader, Chiang Kai-shek, was disciplined, ruthless, and deeply aware that China could not resist foreign enemies while divided from within. During the 1920s, Chiang fought to subdue warlords and bring China under a central government, but another force was rising at the same time: the Chinese Communist Party. Inspired by revolution abroad and strengthened by anger among workers and peasants, the Communists became both an ally and a threat. In 1927, Chiang turned against them and China fell into civil war. While Chinese armies fought each other, Japan watched from across the sea with expanding ambition. Japan had once been isolated, but after the Meiji Restoration it transformed with astonishing speed. It built modern factories, railways, shipyards, schools, and a powerful military. Its leaders believed that survival in a world of empires required becoming an empire itself. Victory over China in the First Sino-Japanese War gave Japan influence over Korea. Victory over Russia in 1905 shocked the world and proved Japan could defeat a European power. But success fed hunger. Japan needed coal, iron, land, markets, and prestige. Many Japanese officers believed the Asian mainland was not merely useful, but destined to fall under Japanese control. Manchuria, rich in resources and strategically vital, became the first great prize. In September 1931, Japanese officers staged the Mukden Incident, using a small explosion near the South Manchuria Railway as an excuse to attack. Tokyo's civilian leaders did not fully control the army in the field, and the army moved faster than diplomacy could restrain it. City after city fell. China, weakened by division and unable to fight a modern Japanese force in the northeast, offered little coordinated resistance. By 1932, Japan had seized Manchuria and created the puppet state of Manchukuo, placing Puyi, the last emperor of China, at its head. The League of Nations condemned the invasion, but Japan simply walked away from the League. The message was clear. International criticism would not stop Japanese expansion. Chiang Kai-shek knew Japan was not finished, yet he also believed the communists were a mortal threat to his government. For years, he tried to fight the communists first and delay a full confrontation with Japan. But public anger grew. Many Chinese believed national survival mattered more than civil war. In 1936, after the Xi'an incident, Chiang was pressured into forming a united front with the communists against Japan. It was an uneasy alliance, filled with distrust, but history gave China little choice. On July 7, 1937, near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing, Japanese troops conducted night exercises close to a Chinese garrison. Confusion turned into gunfire. A missing Japanese soldier became a demand to search Chinese positions. The Chinese refused. What might have remained a local clash became the spark for full-scale war. Japan attacked, and by the end of July, Beijing and Tianjin had fallen. Japanese leaders hoped China would collapse quickly. They expected sharp blows, captured cities, and a negotiated surrender. Chiang Kai-shek chose instead to make the war national. To show the world that China would resist, he opened a second major front at Shanghai in August 1937. Shanghai became a furnace. For 3 months, Chinese and Japanese troops fought street by street, warehouse by warehouse, under artillery, aircraft, smoke, and ruin. Chiang threw some of his best German-trained divisions into the battle, knowing the cost would be terrible. He wanted to prove China's determination and draw international attention. Japanese naval guns and air power pounded Chinese positions. The Chinese fought with courage but suffered enormous losses. When Japanese forces landed south of the city and threatened to encircle the defenders, Chiang ordered a retreat. Shanghai fell, but Japan had learned that China would not be crushed in a few weeks. The road to Nanjing, then China's capital, lay open. As Chinese forces withdrew, exhaustion and disorder spread. Nanjing's defenders tried to prepare, but the city was vulnerable. In December 1937, Japanese troops entered Nanjing. What followed became one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Civilians and prisoners of war were murdered on a massive scale. Women were assaulted. Homes were looted. Streets that had once carried the life of a capital became places of terror. Estimates of the dead vary widely, but the massacre left a wound that still shapes memory and relations between China and Japan. For China, Nanjing was not only a military defeat, it became a symbol of suffering and endurance. Chiang Kai-shek moved the government inland, eventually to Chongqing, far from the coast and deep in China's interior. Japan controlled many major cities, ports, railways, and industrial centers, but China's vast geography became its shield. The deeper Japan advanced, the longer its supply lines stretched. Roads were poor, railways vulnerable, and the countryside difficult to control. Japanese armies could capture cities, but holding the land between them required manpower they could never fully spare. The war became a contest of endurance. Japan had superior equipment, aircraft, artillery, and training, but China had space, manpower, and a growing will to survive. Chongqing became the wartime capital, repeatedly bombed from the air, yet the government remained. Factories were moved inland. Refugees fled westward. Students, teachers, officials, and workers carried books, machines, records, and hopes across mountains and rivers. The war was not only fought by soldiers, it was carried by an entire society forced to retreat without surrendering. By 1938 and 1939, Japan's hope for a quick victory had faded. The Battle of Wuhan showed the scale of the struggle. Wuhan was a key strategic city, and Japan committed major forces to capture it. The Chinese defended fiercely, delaying the Japanese advance and inflicting heavy losses before withdrawing. Japan took the city, but again failed to destroy China's government or army. After Wuhan, the war settled into a grinding stalemate. Japan held much of eastern China, but China's center of resistance survived inland. In the north, communist forces operated mainly through guerrilla warfare, attacking railways, supply lines, and isolated posts. The 8th Route Army and other communist units built influence among rural communities, presenting themselves as disciplined defenders of the people. The Kuomintang continued to bear the weight of many large conventional battles, while also struggling with corruption, inflation, supply shortages, and political strain. The alliance between nationalists and communists was real enough to resist Japan, but never free of suspicion. Each side knew that once Japan was defeated, the question of China's future would return. In 1940, communist forces launched the 100 Regiments Offensive, striking Japanese railways, roads, and strongpoints across northern China. It was one of the largest communist operations of the war and demonstrated their ability to coordinate major attacks. The Japanese responded harshly, launching brutal pacification campaigns in the countryside. Villages suspected of supporting guerrillas suffered terribly. The war became not only a battle of armies, but a battle over people, food, roads, and fear. Meanwhile, global events transformed the conflict. Japan's war in China consumed resources, but Japanese leaders looked farther south towards Southeast Asia, where oil, rubber, and other materials could sustain their empire. In 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and expanded across the Pacific. The war in China became formally tied to the wider Allied war against Japan. China became one of the Allied powers, though it remained poor, battered, and divided. Supplies from the outside world became essential. The Burma Road carried aid into China until Japanese advances cut it. Later, Allied pilots flew supplies over the Himalayas in one of the most dangerous air routes of the war, known as the Hump. American aid and advisors arrived, but China's problems were too deep to be solved from outside. Its armies lacked weapons, transport, medicine, and sometimes food. Soldiers marched for days in thin shoes, fought with old rifles, and endured conditions that would break many modern armies. Yet they continued. Japan, too, was bleeding. Its soldiers were scattered across enormous territories, fighting in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. The empire had expanded beyond what it could sustain. Still, Japanese offensives continued. In 1944, Operation Ichigo became Japan's largest campaign in China, designed to secure rail links and destroy American air bases. Japanese forces achieved major advances, exposing weaknesses in nationalist defenses and deepening the crisis for Chiang Kai-shek. But even then, Japan could not force final surrender. China bent again but did not break. By 1945, the balance of the war had turned decisively against Japan. American submarines strangled Japanese shipping. Allied bombing devastated Japanese cities. In August, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Between those two shocks, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria with overwhelming force. The once feared Japanese Guangdong Army, long stationed in Manchuria as a symbol of imperial strength, collapsed under the Soviet assault. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender. For China, the end of the war brought victory, but not peace. The country had endured 8 years of full-scale war since 1937, and even longer if Manchuria's occupation from 1931 is counted. Cities were ruined, millions were dead, the economy was shattered, and trust between nationalists and communists had nearly vanished. Japan's defeat removed the foreign enemy, but it reopened the unfinished struggle for China itself. Within a year, the Chinese Civil War resumed. The communists, strengthened by rural networks, guerrilla experience, and captured Japanese weapons in the north, gained momentum. The nationalists, exhausted by years of conventional war and weakened by inflation and corruption, struggled to hold authority. In 1949, the communists won the mainland and founded the People's Republic of China, while Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government retreated to Taiwan. The Second Sino-Japanese War, therefore, did more than decide the fate of territory. It reshaped East Asia. It weakened Japan's empire, transformed China's internal balance of power, and left memories of suffering that still influence politics, diplomacy, and national identity. It was a war of bridges and capitals, railways and mountains, massacres and resistance, strategy and survival. It began with imperial ambition and Chinese division, but it ended by changing the destiny of hundreds of millions of people. In the larger story of the Second World War, it must never be treated as a side note. Long before many nations entered the conflict, China was already fighting, bleeding, retreating, rebuilding, and refusing to disappear.